안좀 아산 안줄이야 유간의 신앙교배네 간라에 맞대봐 랑근의 주대봐 신앙교레스 아니 데 나요도 안줄로기 파 유들 파 나와 lö들 파 유파 때네 야 숙체체 줘도 아니 간점질이야 안 덴버트바즈 텐신이 기용거레스 아니 덴진디 깨와라 때네 안 될라 때네 아니 차단라서 바기거레 제래 당한도 두순거레스 지당 아데네 인자다 당한도 돈이 마도한 가사기 아니 데서 세우샤고도 그 말했어 다 돈이 또한 가사이나 돈이 또 봐이나 안디기 아니 유지게 나뉘어도 데머트바 된당교바디 코론 용회도 비 하고도 그랬어 아니 유제 나네 나와를 때네 델바 따야도 덴버트바 징교바디 코론 용도 비 하고도 그랬어 나 덴버트바 진비기 된진들 때네 차다다 뇌차 공론가 yar라서 기교바디야 안디기 다세 마릭바디기 안데 게지 기교바디 안데 코론 용에 또 비하고 두고 그랬다 돈이 또 한디기 가사디기 당한도 돈이 마도 봐 있는 한데 돼서 안데 제가 야고 자고 두고 말해서 가서 디고 말 지나서 디쉬버어
Good morning. So last night, continuing in the text on page 22, we looked at the first three of the four bullet points, in which that was mentioned, firstly, that every object of thought, everything one is thinking about, appears as if it is truly existent. And then, when awareness is strongly focused on that object of thought, one grasps at it as being inherently existent, and from this grasping at true existence follows the other afflictions, such as attachment and anger. And last night in the text, it was mentioned explicitly that those who have come to realize emptiness, not those who are approaching an actual realization, but those who with a valid cognizer have realized emptiness, for them, they recognize this process based on their own actual experience. They come to recognize for themselves how phenomena actually do appear as being truly existent, and how then when one's consciousness is strongly focused on the object, one grasps at it as existing in the way that it appears, and then thirdly, that from this, all the other afflictions arise. So this can be seen based on real experience by those who have realized emptiness. For those such as ourselves, this is difficult for us. We can intellectually understand it, but to come to know it, this is difficult for us.
아니네 된마 디링게 하슈에 된마 되네 직대래 된진디 신유를 추여 로셰인 바당스 된진 덴버트바즈비 된진 세신 추여 로셰인 바당 디 진출라 체메이 캡틴 메초 디 도초 다메바 통요 로데 친지 말로베 로당 디 진출라 체메이 캡틴 여방 녜바 띵니 녀
Returning to the text, so the fourth bullet point at the bottom of page 22. So, just based on Genla's commentary last night, I've changed the translation a bit, taking the first few words and placing them with the third bullet point. So the fourth one, grasping at true existence is a mistaken wrong consciousness with regard to its determined object, and its way of apprehending is not supported by a valid cognizer. However, its opposite, a consciousness which perceives selflessness, is a non-erroneous awareness whose way of apprehending is supported by a valid cognizer. In this, deep certainty will have been gained.
신유를 추여 로시레 생각도 딤바드 디진세데 랑기 신유 진다 신유스나 똑베 진다유다 똑베 신유스 지바르바다 신유라 추위기 로시레스 곧 신유를 추와레 로시레스 곧 진바 나신지 요마레스 오르바다 딤바드바 진진디기 랑기 신유디 로시 추와레 로시레 지상 랑기 신유 진바 나신 요마레스 오르데 로시엔자
The first part of this point starts with that true grasping is a wrong consciousness because it's a wrong consciousness because of the way it engages with its determined object. The object does not exist in the way that it is apprehended or grasped at by true grasping. So true grasping apprehends the object in a way that it does not exist, and therefore it is a wrong consciousness. And here the text uses the term determined object. Synonyms that you may be more familiar with are engaged object or object of the mode of apprehension. So apprehension or grasping. So the true grasping grasps at its object in a way that it does not exist. And therefore, it is a wrong consciousness.
그런게 신유 진반나지 요 말에서 그러봐. 다 가르친 거 된지디 가르친 거라서는 아주기 풍보라 미지 된바 주바 진바 인바나 풍보디 강라에 마도 랑원이 주바 랑원이 주바 진거로 강라에 마도 봐 랑원이 주바 줍줍 진거로 봐. 제산디 강라에 마도 랑원이 주바디 진바 나신 강라마도 랑원이 주바디 요레베스네 디요 말에서 제산 매바 찔러 요바 진여바자 고 로시레스 그러봐. 제산디 신유 고 추제요 레서지.
The consciousness of true grasping apprehends a determined object that is not in accordance with reality. So it is therefore a wrong consciousness. It grasps at an object that does not exist. So what is it that the consciousness of true grasping is grasping at? So it's grasping at, for example, the person as if it existed from its own side. But it does not exist from its own side or by way of its own nature or essence. And therefore, it is a wrong consciousness and a mistaken consciousness.
le chuwa yinba, loxi yinba de koron nyongwe topki nge to hagu to kore jirwa.
The yogin who has realized emptiness with a valid cognizer, the same yogin we were talking about last night, they will know that true grasping is a wrong consciousness because the way it engages with its object is mistaken.
지산 디간에서 하고 그래서 디르와 변행하는 중이다. 그 템바도 담보 동이 마도 녀려야 하는 거 중에 제바치고로 동이세 그러니까 유지 변 풍보를 마스는 풍보 맞아 풍보 템바도 봐 삼근의 풍보지 일로야 간에 능구도 샤요도 강라에 마도 호랑 원의 주베 능구요 바디 봐 나수도 하고 봐지. 다 되니게 나와 나신 파 제바치에 안에 그 지금电진 저와 준도 제바치도 되니지 풍보세야디 직전실로 되네 줍디바르마도 강라에 마도바랑원의 주바 싸우기니 민두세베 통로 도고로 봐. 제가 강라에 마도랑원의 주바 맨도 선비게 녀바 인자 강라에 마도랑원의 줍디 징겐디다 록셰레스. 그래서 그 진바나신지 민두와스 매반자 그 록셰레스네 녀외도 잉에 투야 되려와. 제가 록셰레스야 돼.
The reason why this yogin knows that or realizes that the consciousness of true grasping is a wrong consciousness is because to have become someone who has realized emptiness, they would have engaged in extensive hearing of teachings and reflecting on those, investigating, firstly, how an object appears, and then investigating to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not. So taking, for example, the aggregates, they appear as if they exist from their own side or by way of their own nature or essence. And then they investigate, the yogin investigates, and has been for an extensive period, investigating to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not, if it exists in a way that's independent and unchanging, and comes to realize it does not. It does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. In fact, not only is it not independent, but it is in fact dependence, a dependence arising. So therefore, in the illustration of the aggregates, the self-existent aggregates cannot be found. Therefore, the consciousness that grasps at them as existing in a way that they do not, because they could not be found in this way, has to be a wrong consciousness, because its object that it's grasping at, apprehending, does not exist.
Then, di zinsulla, tseme gyabdi me susya. Chisa timba drupa zimbigi, bani pungbo de kanglai mato rang wenyo drupdikin zimba dila, kola ya gyabdin tsema yorubesene, tsema yomare esen, gyabdin tsema meyabadi hago tugo rejire.
Reading the first part again. Grasping at true existence is a mistaken wrong consciousness with regard to its determined object. It's the first point. And then the second, and its way of apprehending is not supported by a valid cognizer. The yogin who has realized emptiness with a valid cognizer knows this, has realized this.
다 가르선 덴버주바 증에디 가르 증거 유리 가르 증거로서 나도 풍보라 덴버주바 증바이나 풍보데 강라에 뭐 랑원원이 룹되게 진디거로 봐다 강라에 맞여 봐지 그런 원이 여봐도 증거로 봐 당한저기 두스네 그런 딘 강라에 뭐 랑원이 룹바나 진바나 신치 왜냐라 요래 요 말에서 제바지디 여봐지 통구에나 체매 잡도 여봐를 걸어야 여봐 나신고 진바 나시 여봐지 체매 체마진이 여봐이나 잡든 체마 요래다 대지 짐주제도 그 짐바나시 니기요 말봐 동상지마도 니기요 말봐 제가 여바나시 그 짐바나시 여바도 통고 말해 제가 동상지마도 뒤 독초지 통는 거로 봐 제가 잡된 체마요 말해서
The way the yogin has come to realize that true grasping is not supported by a valid cognizer, or is not a valid cognizer itself, is because this consciousness is grasping or apprehending at the phenomenon as if it were existent from its own side, established by way of its own essence or nature. But when one investigates, one finds that the phenomenon doesn't exist in this way. Therefore, the apprehending consciousness cannot be a valid cognizer. Or similarly, if the grasping consciousness that was grasping at the object as existing in the way that it appears, if it did exist in the way that it appears, then this consciousness, this grasping consciousness, would be a valid cognizer. But as the object isn't found, this consciousness is grasping at something that doesn't exist, and therefore cannot be a valid cognizer.
지게 갱구로 샘체지 통해도 어머니 다 샘체지 두 샘페 삼로스 리그로와 자지기 파트위진 번에 지게 랑보시로지 통해나 맨날 랑보시 두 샘페 삼로스 리그로와 니가라 제가 지딜이 비 갱구로 통고 고란을 유딜라 갱구로 능고를 왕신 능고를 낭 어머니 갱구로 두 샘페 로시키고래 지라 맨날 랑보시 지 능고를 어머니 랑보시 두 샘페 삼기고래 다디니가 그 찍라 랑보시 요 두선배 찍 랑보시 낭제 고라 랑보시 요 두선배 삼로시 요라시 찍들에 깽고로시 낭제 깽고로시 두선배 삼로시 요바지 니가 요바 찍바라 바다 나 고니가 요바 찍바다 고니라 잡된시도다 다 되는마 저도 오다 치르마 따가 줘도 메닝원에랑 깽고로시 요대로 와다 통하나지 요대로 와다 미규 천만원선 토고로 와 니기 가르 잡된 제바레스네 대시 강배 나로 두선배 삼로 딜라 로버제버와 체마디기 파 두삼바 나지 파 제용도 따용도 문에 여버 체메 도고로와 제산 델 체마디지 강배 나론마 킹고로 나지 나와 나지 킹고로 두선배 삼로딜라 잡된 체마디 가와레스는 치료로 따디 동배 체마디 고 잡된 체마리다 디 잡된 체마레 제산 디콜로 되니 차들 킹고로 두선배 나와 나시 두선배 삼볼로디 로 거라 체마로 되니 차들 가서 고 잡된 체마이 되래 다 강배 나오는 마음에 랑보치나 능고래 다 랑보치 두선배 삼로셔로 아무니 랑보치 두세배기 코론 랍지 당서 따가로 따디 매니드도 지기 쇠셔겨마도 쇠셔기마도 랑보치 많이 제 랑보치 많이 봐 통으로 제자 랑보치 많이 봐 통어도 대시 랑보치 두선배 삼로도 노주히 하고서 제가 콜로 잡든 참아 말아 봐래. 잡든 참아 말아 콜 로고 맞제제 참아디 가르치는 콜로야 독초게 참아 통해서 콜 가다 참아 통하러와. 제가 내래 잡든 참아요 말해서. 제가 지부들라 잡든 참아요 콜론 뒤에봐 나신 지 콜론기 참아지 녀바자 잡든 참아요래서. 디나신 아주 덴버두바스 제 베디다 디베디나신 아주 덴버두바 징게디 강라야마도 랑응원이 두바시는 거래. 제가 다 나와 아주 누게 민도 제바지는 원래라 나와는 여바 통보에는 걸어 잡든 참아를 차요 그러와. 제가 디 통비 참아 말해 봐죠. 코로나 독쇼시 통고래. 독쇼 통하다 잡든 참아 매바래서. 제가 덴버두바지 비딘진질라 잡든 참아 요 말해서 디 매바디 안에 동유도비 가서 그런 게 냠뇨 돈에 하고 두고 그래서 그러더지.
To illustrate this point, if two of us are standing in here and we look outside and we see a couple of animals outside, we see one, there's a kangaroo, there's also a bull. And so we're a little surprised, there aren't always bulls here, but kangaroos are quite common. So we go outside to investigate a little more, to investigate further. And we go outside where we can now see clearly, and we recognize, yes, there are kangaroos about. So what has happened there is that what we had seen previously, now when we investigate, we have come to realize is the case. So the second time we're outside, we've generated a further valid cognition, apprehending a kangaroo, and this therefore supports what we had previously seen. But the other object that we thought was a bull, we now come to recognize was not at all. It's just some structure that has a similar shape that in the right light could be mistaken for a bull. And now that we have investigated, we've come to see that that is not a bull, it's just some kind of structure. And now we've generated an opposing consciousness, which is a valid cognizer. And this valid cognizer is contrary to the previous consciousness which thought that apprehended a bull, and that then turns out to have been a wrong consciousness. And how can we be certain? Because we have now generated an opposing consciousness, which is a valid cognizer, recognizing that object just as some structure and not as a bull. Similarly, then, true grasping, well, let's just say a consciousness grasps at an object, a phenomenon, as existing in the way that it appears. In other words, as truly. Then when one investigates, one comes to see the opposite is true. That the phenomenon does not exist in the way that it appears. That it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this is a contrary consciousness. And this one is in accordance with reality. It's a valid cognizer. And we know through our own experience here that what the consciousness that was previously apprehending an object to exist in the way that it does not was a wrong consciousness. And we know that through our own experience because we have now generated a contrary consciousness that's in accordance with reality and a valid cognizer.
디 진저라 아니 가서 친지 말로 불러래 해서 디 독초다 다도 주바 진비기 다진기 독초디 다음에 봐 다음에 또 비글로 다음에 봐 진비로디 디로지 친지 말로 봐래 해서 로 친지 말로래 지상고 다요 강라에 마도 랑응wen의 주변 동바 세디 하 진비글로디기 로디기 고 진바나신 유디 다라 여래서 지상고 친지 말로 봐래서 로 친지 말로 봐래서 그 진바나지 진다도 여래 봐래서 디 지사다 동이도배 가사디기 강라에 디도쇼 강라에 마도 바랑문의 주변 동상지 도구여 반자 되니기 도쇼 다음에 또 로디 친지 말로 봐 임바다 하고 두고 그래지.
The next sentence. However, its opposite, a consciousness which perceives selflessness, is a non-erroneous awareness. Here then, the consciousness that perceives selflessness or realizes selflessness, this is a consciousness that is in accordance with reality. Therefore, it is not erroneous, unlike the grasping at true existence.
Di inzada, di zinsulas, tsime gyabdin yobangs. Jiza da meba topik lo digi, da tum da, rangwani, gangalma, rangwani juba, tongba di zimba nashin, dela gyabdin tsema yore, esire. Jiza da garisane, gyabdin tsema yore, gangalma, rangwani juba, tongsan re, sempiki, samlo di, tsema di, dela gyabdin tsema yore. Pene gasa jigi, gangalma, rangwani juba, tongba reda, sepe, tongsan tsema ngeba ngeje. Oda 강라마도 추에 단지 강라마 랑원이 좀 동바래다 세베기 다 체매지 내바녀로와 지도다 미션다지게 결혼기 디삼바나 다가 이나면 제바제바는 미션다지 강라마 랑원이 좀 동상 도용 그래 지디야 때문에 코로나 동상 도용 지사 수제바 제바이나 강라마도 랑원이 주베데 통고 말에 수제바 제나 제바 제지 도용도 강라마 랑원이 동상 도고 지사 yaptin 체마 요래 해세래 그런 세마임바 맞이 딜링 빈 미지기 꾸마 꾸미해서데 미지기 결혼 꾸마 꾸샤라 나게 꾸마 꾸미해서로와 다 미션다지기 오코 꾸마 꾸마선라는 코 잡진로와 코 서포트 간지로와 제산 동윤도 그런데 세마로 올려드니로와 네 동윤도 선로 되니래네 아니 디 결혼은 또래선 따다 하고요 말이지 도과사시로 제산 미션다지 심주지 제바제지 동라싱이 두바 동바딘 통고디 현다기 또비기 체마디 니 현다 지기 또비 체마디 잡든 록지고 잡든 체마스 디시고로 봐다 잡롤 봐디 디 레사지
The sentence continues. I'll read it all. However, its opposite, a consciousness which perceives selflessness, is a non-erroneous awareness whose way of apprehending is supported by a valid cognizer. The wisdom which realizes emptiness or selflessness, that consciousness apprehends its object in the way that it exists. It's factually concordant. And it's supported by this, by a valid cognition, this investigating consciousness that has come to realize selflessness. So this supporting this valid cognition supports the consciousness that is realizing selflessness or emptiness.
지게 칼라로 신에 bendigo 자로 신에 그든 아무시 동배네 미직 참바로 잡지니 되네게 유디베 갑라 직 칼라야 디지디가 동네 나무 바하고 국민도 하자고 국민도 bendigo 차로 신에 다가 차위 바하고 국민도 참바 잡지 나중에는 직 제례기 원포디 견셔되 bendigo 동도 차위 바하고 국민도 당아저 되네게 견면나데 동네 남산 차위 바하고 국도와 제가 미니여 봐체 직디 직 참바다 되니게 나지 직여비 견제네 아니 그 자직 동료도 어디 가면 참 가데 띵가면 민두세데 진로고도 가면 민두세게 좋아 미직디기 동인데 어디 가면 레샤서 권이 직이 가면 직가면 말하려고 봐다 다 권이 수대 미션다 직이 레시네 미션다 니숨직 레제 동도 어디 가면 레샤서 잡로라 미션다 니숨직 어디 가면 레샤라나 대시 당보 가모레 라펜 델야 잡로라야 또 마레 라펜 망부중로와디 잡된 차로 잡된 체마 차로 왔던 나무이 하고 체마디게 차상 잡된 체마 차로 다 대시 띵가모 민도 라펜 디기 코롱기 제기 옹보 견셔제 공가모이 하모고 현자 그 코롱가모 민도 셈벨로 노트 차대로 받아 가서 콜라 잡진 체마라기요 말아 가서 잡진 체마라는 어가모 레민도 라펜 고로와 디 말아와로 와지자 차상이 나모리 코롱이 독쇼 나모리 세데 체매하고 제가 지게 하고도 디 현다게 되니게 하고도 잡진 체마요 봐서 지디래 잡진 체마요 말에 세데 on bedu 디나지로 와다.
And to further explain this role of supporting consciousness, in this case a valid cognizer, is, let's say, tea is served, and there are two people, one of which has a cold, so they can't taste very, very accurately. And the question is, has sugar been added to the tea or not? And the one who has a cold says, well, I think tea has no sugar. And their companion says, no, I can taste sugar. And then a third person comes and also has a sip of tea, and they support the healthy person, saying sugar has already been added. It doesn't need to be added again. So they are both supporting the correct assertion that sugar has been added, and they are opposing the person who thought that sugar had not been added. So this is the role that a supporting consciousness plays. This process is the same as utilized in the scientific community. When a scientist presents an assertion backed up by evidence, that evidence needs to be replicated by other scientists to affirm that analysis is correct and unmistaken. And when other scientists engage similar experiments but come to the same result, then they are supporting the finding, and therefore it's taken as correct, as valid. Whereas if other scientists do the same experiments but come to a different conclusion, then no one will pay any attention to that initial finding. So too here, with the consciousness of true grasping, because a phenomenon has never been found to exist by way of its own nature or essence, there is no one to support this. No one to support that true grasping is in accordance with reality, is factually concordant, but rather, because the opposite has repeatedly been found to be the case, that phenomena are empty of existing by way of their own nature or essence, that view is supported by valid cognition. That is the view in accordance with reality. And the bullet point concludes, in this, deep certainty will have been gained. This then continues this theme of this part, that the yogin who has come to realize emptiness with valid cognition will have realized this point with deep certainty due to the power of their realization.
ngāzu yu ganesh nāwa ine nāwa nāshinji ngāzu loli nāwa nāshinji dōnla dāgāra yoribēsine di yo marēs chebaji shimju chebayi nāwa nāshin dōnla meheba nāwa nāshin meheba tōngsāngshi dōgurēs nāwa dili dōkshōla tōngyōgurwa tōngsāng dōgurēs jizā nāwa nāshinji yo marēs gurwa.
The meaning of this section is that despite every phenomenon appearing to us as if existing by way of its own essence, when we investigate, we come to find that no phenomenon exists in the way that it appears. In fact, they are therefore rather empty of existing by way of their own essence.
지금 소부이나 다당아주의 셈이나 아주 셈 당아주 조당 주다 셈이는데 삼로지 삼다베나 아주 삼로티 셈세디 제상 아주는 나이도 고랑은 주베 능고르데 이내 아주 셈디 랑원이 마주바리스 코 셈이 고고 랑고 강래 모두 랑원이 주베 동바인들이 동사레시 동바들이스 제상 랑 아주 셈디 강래 마주바 랑원이 마주바리 동바리스 딱 디 동바레스 지나 강라야마도 랑원이 두베 동바 인장 랑원이 두베 동바 인장 셈디 아주 셈세디 현실의 뒤에네 줍디 바시레 현실의 파 뒤에네 파 뢰 파 다바 좀 유바레 마도 대 강라야마도 랑원이 두바도 요 말에서 나 조르 가서 소야디 대 삼다에 디가 담고 거래.
Here it's important to relate this to our own mind, that when it's said that every phenomenon appears to exist by way of its own nature or essence, this includes our own mind being a phenomenon. But when we investigate, despite it appearing to be independent, we realize it cannot exist and it does not exist in this way. It is not self-existent or existent by way of its own essence. It is empty of existing by way of its own essence. And in fact, rather than being independent, it is actually the way it exists is dependent arising.
제가 당하나 저기 셈 랑원의 주변 셈 코라 라신 주변 동바 차들이 상예기 셈 라신 주변 동바세야 당하나 저기 셈 라신 동바일에 개발 가요 말아 집에 지켜서 라신 주변 동바라 개발 매발해.
Take this further then. When one comes to realize that one's mind is empty of existing by way of its own nature, it's the same for everyone's mind, including that of the Buddha. In fact, there's no difference in the empty nature of our mind and a Buddha's mind.
Dalai 최고식으로 최고고 곡대사로 곡대라기로 최고고로와 지난 뭐니고 세다 뭐니고 최고고 세다 근데 곡대사 뒤로와 당 알아 주게 셈라신 주베 동바데라 곡대당 최고고 가라고 말다 알아 주게 셈라신 주베 동바데 곡대 레베 최고고 레베선데 말해서 상기 유게 셈라신 주베 동바데라 아니 곡대레스 아니 So this,
I'll just, as a translator, slightly rephrase what the last sentence from the previous segment. There's no difference between the emptiness of our mind and the emptiness of any other person's mind, including the mind of a Buddha. The emptiness of all minds there's no difference between the emptiness of all minds. And the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha is called the Dharmakaya, or more specifically, the nature truth body. The Dharmakaya in English, the truth body, or if that's divided, would be the nature truth body. But while there's no difference between the emptiness of an ordinary being's mind and the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha, which is the nature truth body, our mind is not the Dharmakaya, it's not called the Dharmakaya, it's not called the nature truth body.
상예기 셈 라신 주변 동니데라 동바데라 라신 동니데라 냥데세로 냥데 미네베 냥데스 천다고래. 그래서 당 알아 주기게 셈 라신 주변 동바데 냥데 레베스는 냥데 말해서 그러다. 라신 오니고 세로라 오니 rwa. Chisa the sanji rashin yande the ngoni chiba rwa mingha rwa mato.
The nature truth body of a Buddha is also called non-abiding nirvana. So the different types of nirvana, non-abiding nirvana. So we certainly cannot say that we've achieved non-abiding nirvana. So whilst our mind is empty, and that emptiness is no different from that of a Buddha, we cannot call the emptiness of our mind non-abiding nirvana, nor the nature truth body, nor the truth body, the Dhammakaya.
Rangxinyi nyangde la ko nyangde la go ma rangxinyi nyangde es rangxinyi nyangde la ne rangxinyi khorong nyomo ba dan ja de ba de rangxinyi nyomo yo ma ko la nyomo be le ba yo ma de rangxinyi rangxin dong ba wa rangxin dong ba yin zhe rangxin nyomo be me wa ji za me ba za rangxin nyomo ba dan nyomo be ma le ba de nyomo be ma le ba za ko la rangxinyi nyangde de es wo le 아도 냥디래라고 말 라신이 냥디래서 두수 라신이 냥디 라신이 냥디라는 코로 셈기 라신디 뇽모바단 자화로와 셈기 장신 동반이로와 군주비 최근에 요마로와 지서 셈기 장신 동반이래 셈기 장신 동반인자 셈기 장신디 뇽모바단 자화래 지서 뇽모바 장신기 그디 있나 뇽모바단 자죠 장신이 코로 뇽모바단 자죠와 아스니 셈기는 가나주기 셈기 장신 줘로와 가나주 셈진기 셈기 장신 동반이 줘로와 딜라 장신 동반이디 rangxinji ke gedi na nyomo be ngo zawa yin ju ma nyo re nyomo be khole leba shu ma nyo re che sa khole ya rangxinji zawa yin nyomo be leba gyön shu ma nyo re sa nyomo be leba ma shu ba sa rangxinji nyang de re so de nga zu gyu ge de semgi rangxin semgi dongba yin se wo da semgi rangxin dongba ni de la min nga zu gyu ge rangxin nyang de re se de nga zu rangxin nyang de 아베디 답드당 보다 나주기 셈기 주기 충이들 민갈라워서 장신 양대래라고 그래지. 다 장신 양대래에서는 말해지. 양대 말에 장신 양대래에서 장신 양대에서 민다고 그래지. 다디 다 나주기 셈기나 상기기 셈기 충이들라. 셈이 장신이 주변 동바들라 나주기 셈기 장신이 동바에 상기기 셈기 장신 셈 그런 장신이 주변 동바들라 민갈라서 장신이 양대라고 그래지. 그래서 그 랑신 냥들라도 랑신이 그 녀모베 레바 슈마뇨 와레스 거야. 마뇨 와서 랑신 냥데레스. 랑신 세대 자와 유니식으로 자와 유니 녀모베 레바 슈마뇨 와레서 그 랑신 냥데스 민다고 그러지.
The nature of the mind, the final reality, in Tibetan the word churni, because it's translated in a variety of ways, the final reality of the mind is that it is empty, and being and there's being, and or it could be expressed as being naturally empty. It's empty of all stains, all afflictions. It has never been in its nature afflicted. So this is the state for the mind of all beings. Their final reality, their churni. This is empty or emptiness. Empty perhaps, and it has never been in its nature afflicted. And this is called natural nirvana. So we would say the final reality of the mind of all beings, its churni, the final reality, the churni of all beings, is empty, naturally empty. And this is natural nirvana. But one wouldn't say all beings have attained the state of nirvana.
Yes, Dondala Manzu Semgi Rangshin Gilla, Semgi Rangshin, you droop the Nyomo Merva. Then another Nyomo Bangal Sem, Nyomo by Yorba, Yorba, which are Konga Yore. In Anzu Semlia, Rangshin, you droop the big Nyomo, but Yorba, Yomarwa. Chisa, Gala Matoba Rangu when you droop the Nyomo Merva. Meva Gala Matoba Rang when you droop the Nyomo Merva. Chisa, Nanzu Semgi Rangshin, Gala Matoba Rang when you droop nyomo bigi tongbare. Kesa Galaya Matioba Rangon to be Nyomo Zawagin in Mebarwa, she's a ranching in Yadis. She's an simply Chini della, Galaya Mato Rang when you to be tongbare, Galang simply Rashin, Gala Tomba Telia, Galama Rangon to be Nyomo said, Nyomo Begini, Leva Shumano, simply Walla di Zawagin in Mebar was. She's a ranching in Yadis.
The nature of mind is free of the afflictions. It's unpolluted by or uncontaminated by the afflictions. So whilst we, as ordinary beings, and what has just been said in that sentence applies to us too. But for us, we certainly have afflictions. We have anger, we have attachment, but they are not the nature of the mind. Our mind is not established or existent by means of the afflictions. It is naturally empty of the afflictions. That is the meaning of natural nirvana.
상이게 셈게 라신당 아주 셈게 라신이가 라신지 뇽모바드 자와직바셔로다 다 가르켜버 요래서네 아주게 셈게 텔야 로버기티마 뇽모방 로버기티마 망보여 다 되셔코로 뇽모바치다 로버기티마시 그래 아주 셈게 텔 로버기티미게 아주 셈게 라신디 디 안로버 셈디 로버기티미게 바 tum되어 와 tum되어제 바 디디도와 제가 tum되 같이 로버기 팀한테 차상 해야 봐자. 제가 냥 디엘의 냥은 라도 뇽모 발라 그래. 냥은 디 사주로 찍여 냥 디. 냥 세대 뇽모 발라 냥은 세 뇽모 발라 고거래. 데 랍나 뇽모 빵와라 뇽모 발라 데 발라도 뇽모 사번째 빵 받으려고. 제가 나라도 그게 셈게 라신디 냥은 디 말해. 그래서 뇽모 발에 대바 말해. 뇽모 빠요 말해. 제가 뇽모 로버기 뇽모베 띵tum되어 해제. 다 상계기 셈라신 주바디 뇽모 바다 자와래. 뇽모 빵사로 와서 님보 공배 또 뇽모 바쳐서 빵사 와서 냥대에서셔. 제가 냥대에서디 냥은 세디 뇽모 바체. 제가 델레 데 메데세디 빵다 마빵바 데세디 빵바자. 마디바스는 마빵바르지. 제가 아주 그게 심게 라신다 상기 심게 라신이라 개발요 말레스. 이내 가르쳐버려 요슨 로버기 디미기 아주 그게 심게 라신 로버기 디미 징되어레스. 상기 심게 라신 로버기 디마 차상 빵 차와레스. 제가 디켜버려레스 양디에서. Tibetan 세마제.
Do. So we've presented that our mind is naturally free of the afflictions. It's in the nature of the mind is empty of any kind of contamination or stain or affliction at all, and that there's no difference in the nature of the mind between the mind of one being and another, including that of a Buddha, and that this final reality of the mind, this journey, is natural nirvana. But us ordinary beings have not achieved nirvana. So then we're seeing here there's a similarity between us and a Buddha who has achieved the state of nirvana. But there is also a difference in that we have not achieved the state of nirvana. So the difference between our minds, the similarity between us and the Buddha, is that our minds are empty of any stain at all. Its nature, its final reality of our mind and the Buddha's mind is the same. The difference, though, between our mind and that of a Buddha is that our mind is obscured temporarily by the afflictions, or the term you'll be more familiar with is the afflictions are adventitious. So they temporarily cover or obscure the nature of the mind. A Buddha who has attained actual nirvana, non-abiding nirvana, has completely eradicated afflictions together with their seeds and stains, and therefore has transcended sorrow, has gone beyond the state of the afflictions. And there in English, I was using the literal translation of the Sanskrit word nirvana. Nirvana is having gone beyond what? The afflictions. Or to express it differently, it's transcended sorrow. Sorrow meaning the afflictions. A being, a Buddha, who has completely transcended sorrow has attained nirvana. We have not transcended sorrow at all. Our mind is still veiled or obscured by the afflictions. But its final reality is not at all tainted by those same afflictions. So this then, hopefully is clear in this and previous segments, is the similarity between the mind of an ordinary being and that of a Buddha, as well as now the difference between the mind of an ordinary being and that of a Buddha.
sel zangmo ma seba ta jipare jezang koni wo sel imbale jibo yo marte ine jigdi gyun chasang zangmo sueje zangmo zangjang sueje waiting de cha deore jigdi da zangmo suge la deore diang pa zangmo seba ine deji zangmo suge sel da jibu jike cha dewa di na xin nga zuge sanji ge semdi sel zangmo suge de da jibache nga zuge semdi sem rashing de tongba di sel zangmo ma suge sel da jibache 진이가 셀 임바 집어 나중에 안쪽에 셈다 사이 셈 라싱이 주변 동바 임바라 개바가 매바제 제자다 직딜 녀모버게 둠데 녀모 마방바자 소소 상마서야 하되 봐 인자 녀바 나세 나지 녀모버 마방바래 사이기데 셀 장어서 차와 나지 녀모 바샤다 제바 매바서 차라더니 장마 차되로와 지난 개바라든데 책으로 빼로시디.
There's a famous illustration given here of two gold nuggets found beneath the earth. They're both removed. One is cleaned and polished and is golden and beautiful. The other is still obscured by the impurities of the earth. So both of them are in their final reality, are gold, but one has been thoroughly cleansed. The other is not. The gold is still largely obscured. So this then is the clear similarity with our mind. So the final reality of the mind of an ordinary being and the Buddha is that it's empty of any contamination at all. But the mind of a Buddha, that has been completely purified of all contaminations, whereas ours is still veiled, still obscured by the afflictions.
제가 알아주기 셈게 라싱이 주변 동반이데 동반이데 당 알아주기 년보 검체 다도 지비게 다셈바 녀모바 되샤로서 봐 녀모바 찾아 빵여디 알아주기 셈 라싱이 주변 동바디 최유고 최고를 마음바나 최유고 오저에 디레 당아주 산지고 봐 녀모바 찾아 녀모바 바샤네 제바 빵여디 배는 알아주기 셈게 라싱 동반이 저로 봐 셈라 동반이데 아주 녀모 빵제 람 냠len제 초람토 졸람토 된 통람토 된데 통람토 녀모바 아니 지금 군다디게 빵여디 아주 셈게 라신 동반이디 곡된세 오르다 곡된라 녀모보 군다바 곡된세 미토 그래 곡된 녀모보 군다방 벽 곡된 지다 곡된르와 곡된들라다 현재다 pompa 지다 민 곡된세 담보 다 곡된세 차고디 곡된세 차로디 최권조 세야 최고다 최권조 Shio Conjo Sanji Chio Ni Yorwa, Lamden da Gokte Ni Yorwa, Chezang Arajugi, Lam Yang Sim Rashin to be Tonga Jorwa, Chezang Arajugi, Pa Yamlen, Lam Gom, Yamlen Chedang Arajugi, Desha, Denzin Lasoba, Denzin Gunda de Pangje, Pang Yondu, Denzin Gunda de Meba Sudu, Nazu Simge Rashin di Gokten Chagore. Delang to Chio Conjo setting Anzukila, Ta Conjo's Topsare. 제가 디 토비오데 가사 코론 기능 거죠 사송거래 제상 안줄 최고조세 레바래 다든마 야야야 직 공공 거지도 다 녀모바 사번째 차상방야 바샤다 차상 방야도 벤 가지 녀모바 사번데 제가 방야도 다 바샤마 방야지 사번에 제가 방바있나 다 냥디에서 탈바세도 벤 가지게 장슈sem 마공 바제 녀모바 사번데 제가 방소나 대신 안줄 랑심 랑심 주베 동바데다 탈바세 곡된세로다 탈바세 디차고래 다 된마지 야죠 곰지 녀모바 바샤다 제가 방바있나 내 미니베 냥디에서 차고 미니베 냥디에서 취기구세 차고로 제자디 제장 안주기 곡된 차야 대한 안주기 셈게 랑신 주베 동바 셈게 랑신 동바 니디 마오바나 곡된 차게데 땡아주 장쇼셈 냠레 마제바체 아니 녀모바 사본데 집에 빵바 있는데 탈바세 차로 탈바토 다된 마 장쇼셈 냠레 집에 토네 바샤데 집에 빵이도 데니게 안주 셈게 랑신 동바 니디 뭐 취유구세 차고래 제자디 안주기라데 지 차야게 차상 귀리 지카소래 자왈 마송 안주기를 예래 바래세오래
The emptiness of our mind, this final reality that is now so obscured by the afflictions. Because despite this covering, this obscuring by the afflictions, because the final reality is emptiness, we can attain the state of the Dharmakaya, the truth body. And this is done through the unveiling or the elimination of the obscurations, allowing the pure nature of the mind, the unobscured nature of the mind to shine through. There's a sequence of trainings, the path, namely the path, the sequence of trainings, which is the paths that need to be cultivated in our continuum. These, as we continue in our progression, cultivating ever more profound paths within our continuum, we'll come to realize emptiness directly and give rise to our first true cessation, where we abandon the acquired afflictions. So at this point, when we abandon the acquired afflictions, when we realize emptiness directly, for the first time, we abandon the acquired afflictions, we give rise to a true cessation. And that true cessation is the same final reality of our mind. This pure nature of our mind is now referred to as a true cessation. It is also called the Dharma jewel. This has been achieved. So here the yogin has abandoned the acquired afflictions. They haven't yet abandoned the seeds or come close to starting on eradicating the stains or the imprints. But they have attained a true cessation. The nature of their mind is now both called a true cessation and the Dharma jewel. As the yogin progresses, they will come to eradicate the afflictions together with their seeds entirely. And this is called the state of liberation. It can also be called the state of nirvana, but it would be a lower form of nirvana. It is also a true cessation. So in our Mahayana tradition, we would call this state of when the afflictions together with the seeds have been abandoned, we'd call it liberation, but it would also be called a true cessation. Then, the yogin now, having abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds, being a bodhisattva, so their wisdom is conjoined with bodhicitta, will progress further, eradicating the stains or the imprints. And when those are eradicated, then there is no trace of obscuration, of defilement or contamination left. Then non-abiding nirvana is attained. The Dharmakaya is attained, the truth body. Both of those, the truth body or Dharmakaya and non-abiding nirvana, those are attained when the stains or imprints of the afflictions are also eradicated. So here for us, the key point is to understand the sequence, but in particular to understand that the seed of all of this is on our continuum, because our mind is empty. Final reality of our mind is no different from that of a Buddha.
Kam Dewar Shibe, Ningbo Sayada, the Ming Naso Tagore, in the Donda Jibare, Sim Rashing to be Tomba de la Kam Dewar Shibe, Ningbo Semi Tagere, and there Sangi Rigia Lagere, Sangi Rashin Niria Lagere, Ming Naso Yunguri, in the Dondala, Delia Minibe Nyan, Caso, Rashin Yande Lagere, Rashin Yande. Tisa Dichaza, Sim Rashing to be Tomba de Lagore, Donda Jigre, Dele, Ming Kagata, Maduko. Dimado Dondala, Sem Rashing to be Tomba in the Lagore, Jazza Yirik, Rashin Yirik said this Lagore. Sem Rashing to be Tomba de la Carlos Sangi Yirik. Sangi Rashin Yirik, Rashin Yirik. Then Rashin in Yangde. The right Tomba in Kishime, Rashin Yang Days like Reze, and a Sangi Rig like Reze, the Rashin Nirik like Reze, that do mean soon. Rashin Nirik Rashin Payedic and Sangi Rictes or Rashin Nirik, Semjan Kanishina, Rashin Korangul Yudik and Rictes or Sangi Rict. Sangi Yirik.
For all beings, they have the mind, which is naturally empty. This is natural nirvana. It's a natural way of abiding, or the natural way of existing of the mind. This also is called our Buddha potential. Other translators call this a Buddha nature or Buddha essence, and there are many other words. I think it's Tathagata Gaba. There are many different names for it. But for us to understand here is that we have this potential to become a Buddha. This Buddha potential is the natural way of abiding for our mind, or the natural way our mind exists. It is also called natural nirvana. And it's because we have this foundation that we can have confidence that spiritual progression is certainly within our grasp. And the final goal, that of Buddhahood, is achievable for all of us.
Denzin Marik Badiki, Meva Sere. Di Meva Sere Tombangi to Locom Gore. Di Gombalatini, Denzin Marik Badiki, Meva Su Tuguri, Tuguri, Scarson, Kozo Rashi Matuba, Simkora Rashi Matuba, Chesa Dinesa, Simgi, and Jesus Samuel, Tanga the Chick, There's some suicide, the ranching Jubade, pass, say, Jugurva, Bekora, Samajan, Bekabo says, Sevisaga Chatugorva. And these are the Sangi, Rikiore, Chesanga, Semshu Chawama, Semshu, Yaman Chogore, Anzulia, Manzu, Nindo, Jundice, Konyomo, Baya, Meba, Suade, Samasua, Pesuchi, Chesanga, Zebena, Anzuladi, Rikiores. Rik Mena, and Yamnechena. Sangi go top to a man, got Rig Meba and the top to a man, some of you got Banguia Marwa, and that is more than Anjuli. Sangi Rigore, which is a simple Tamja Sangi Rigore, Chizanima, Sangi Sangi Jumne Digena, Tambo Naransu Najiri, Chesa, Sangi Horongi, Nyomo Bangje, Gomje, and Nyomo Baji, Koron, same ranching to be Tombadi, then ya Chuyo Yurtubares, Chesan Arzinia, as Com Yamles Dame to be share of Gomje Combiner, Nyomo Pampa Latini, and same ranch to be Tombadi, Chuyo Yurtugres, don't that is Warwa. She said that Rashi didn't raise a Rashin Chini, Rashin Rik, Sangi Rik, Rashin Nirik, and then because of the young dear said. She said, did you Lamanale, Rashin Nirik, or something particular Rashin Nirik says, come the worship in Boyores, Sangi Rik, or says, I did as a distant water. Chini Mare, Sangi Rik. Rik said, Rashin Nir said, Rashin Nir, Rashin, Rik Dilla Cabernicho, Rashin Nirik said, and Gigu Rik said, Nicho, which is that didn't answer Rik, Rashin Nir is for him.
This natural emptiness of our mind, this is the Buddha potential that we all possess. It is also natural nirvana, and it's also called the naturally abiding lineage. So because we have this, we can generate confidence that with effort and with skill, we can transform ourselves. Through effort and skill, we can and eventually eradicate the obscuring afflictions, their seeds and imprints. This is within our grasp. And just like every aspect of life, the more enthusiasm one applies oneself with, the quicker the result is achieved. So for those amongst us and throughout the world who apply themselves with skill and enthusiasm, in direct proportion to that, their attainment of the Dharmakaya will come ever quicker. So reflecting on this, gaining certainty that because we have this lineage, this Buddha potential, this naturally abiding lineage, we can progress. We can become the person we aspire to be. If we lacked the natural abiding lineage, natural nirvana or Buddha potential, we could not develop, we could not become Buddhas. But because we do possess the naturally abiding lineage, Buddhahood is attainable for all of us.
Denzindiki meba sögore sidi meba söda de karasırosene ana tugin benim ana tug karasırosene çalar de karada çık ha mogona ne nöjü şöye mabuli görwa ha gona ha mogoylo de dosarwa meba sögoro meba çaro benim cinga tug karasore çık çalar şinde karine çık söda de ha mogona ane nöjü magoyun gura Jala Suyada Hagosona, Hamogo will the door sarva, Mema Chasarvada, Zama Chatava, Hamogo the Zama Chatava. Dina she, Nazuki Chugi Nisu di Chasa, Hamogo di Meva Suku Regina, Hago Shingachi Horeji, Shingbana, Mashingba di Meva Chatore. Jazan Zama Suyadirva, Desha Kondong Aye Meva Suyadi, Zama Suyadi, so this girls. Chugi ni ngui ni su rangxin zhubi dongba de nga zu ha gu gu ma de che sang rangxin ha mo ge je rangxin zhuba me ba ji le yo ra sam jin de go ji no chu xia di me ba so ba la rangxin zhuba de ngui je sim ju ji rangxin zhuba dongba de che me do song na Ranshin Juba Yores and Lodi Notre Mebacha or Samus Sada, Samus Yoro. Cezan Denigo Lodi Gomba Compalatene, Deji Longone de Mebase. That in the Sabon Yoba, the Nuba Roger, but the Yana the Compalat and Nuba de Mebacha. That Nuba Mebas and the Basha Roji, but the Hatomba to Yana the Compalat in the Basha Mebacha, which is not the wind is a Hago Lodigi, Gian de Hamogo Lodi Mebacha. Just a dinajing Lobsang Dorje, what been Angsi Roji Sing, marching by the pen, Chiki Notre Mongo water. Just Ansi Sing Jang, Sing Sona. Marching by the Lord Mevacha, just not the Lord Sing by Charwa, Karine, and Dinaja Danga to get no more Meva said, we need to chicken, we need to Jidawas, Seme the dog, Hago, Bajo, the Hagona Hamago, the Meva Charwa, and the chicken to get no more Bachaza Meva, so said this Hago Bajo, that don't know this Meva said. Just not only said the dog, I said, Chu, we need the condition that the Hagobachi or Hamogona, not to show what is Hagobachi, what I said. The Hagobala, Yana, the Jang, Shimjuche, Hago to mother, the Shimjuda Majawa, then as a Karishi and Karina, Hawa, Shinga Marawa, a dinner Chibarwa.
Yeah, I want to remind you of something that came up much earlier in the text, before we got into the various ways of analyzing, when His Holiness was presenting the importance of this topic. So generally in our life, if something is unknown, problems follow. If we understand a situation well, we can thereby use our wisdom and we can navigate a situation well. But if we are confused, in the dark about what's going on, we're going to make mistakes. And another way to understand this, if someone has never learned to count, if they don't even have basic numeracy, life is going to be difficult. Whereas if they have these skills, or to the extent they have numeracy or understand mathematics, life will be correspondingly easier. They'll be able to navigate situations where numeracy is required so much more easily than a person who's confused, doesn't know how to count. So this is precise. So His Holiness brought this up much earlier in the text. And I want to remind you now, because this is why we're talking about emptiness again and again, coming to understand the actual way phenomena exist, or the actual way phenomena abide. Because this for us is still unknown. We haven't realized emptiness. We've come to some understanding, and dependence on your attention to the teachings and reflection of them, you have deepened that understanding. But we still have confusion about how phenomena exist in reality. And because of this confusion, just like a person going through life unable to count and making mistakes, we keep grasping at things as existing in a way they do not. We grasp at illusions as if they're real, and therefore our attachment arises, our anger arises. But to the extent we come to understand the actual way that phenomena exist, to that extent, both in meditation and later out of meditation, we'll recognize that phenomena appear to us in an illusory manner. This is not how they exist. So why get excited and grasp at things that actually are like illusions? So this is why there is such an emphasis here on coming to understand reality. Of course, this is the main topic of this text, but throughout the Dharma, this is what we need to come to understand, because this leads to freedom, the eradication of all problems and difficulties for ourselves and through our guidance for all beings.
Semjikula Sangi Yores or Sangi Yores or Tanganzo in that Semjikula Kashi Semjikula Sangi Yomares or I didn't do some time that bed Chiki Yores, see Mer Doctor, bed Gadaru, she was Tungudua, the Hansa, the Semjikula Sangi Yomare, some Gandigi, killing Endigi, that Mishandaji, Semjikula Sangi Yoralabna, Hansa Chairua, Chairua. Daya Semjikula Sangi Yores, killing Endigi. 심진규라 상여 요말달라데 미전다 심진 상여 요말라네 양고도 항상 그래 어디 심진규라 상여 요말라서 항상 그러다 진짜 되는 두지 시행동안 저게 지게 독초 가다로 시우진바데 지글로야 합득할 삼단지 리도와
There are, and you're almost certainly aware, of differing presentations on this topic, where there's the presentation I've given, and there are others who say, we are already Buddhas. We just haven't realized it. So this seems quite contradictory. So it's important to understand this presentation well, otherwise, when reading books or meeting people, confusion can come, argument may even follow.
다 심진유규라 상계 요래 세디 대시셰바쟁이 심라신 유튜브 동바디 심진 탐지유규라 요러와 심라신 유튜브 동바디 대시 심진 라신 유튜브 동바데라 갈래에서는 라신이 양디에스 라기레스 제가 라신 양디 고 상계 라신의 상계레스 우르 제가 심라신 유튜브 동바디 심진 탐지유규라 요래스 디 상계기 심기 라신 유튜브 최고디당 개발 요 말레스 되는 인상 심진규라 상계 요래라고 그러다 심진규라 상여 요래 라펜디기 지게 켈링엔디게 가르순 거라서 금전 가르삼당와서 심전 탐지규래 심 라신 유튜브 동바디 요래스 심 라신 유튜브 동바 거론 라신기 양디레스 고 라신기 고 상게레 녀모바다 녀모바 메디레스 지자고 심진규라 상여 요래스 심진규라 상여 요래 세겐디기 금전 가르서는 심전 탐지규래 심 라신 유튜브 동바디 요래스 그래 어디 심지 상여 요래서 되라고 김전 가르서 뒤에 심진규 심지 상여 인르고 말다 상여 인르고 상여 레베스는 말에 이나 심진규라 상여 요래서 그러와 예비 김전 가르람나 심진규라 심 라신 유튜브 동바도 요러와서 그래 니고를 라신이 상여래서 그래
The other view would state that, not that we are a Buddha, but that we have the mind of a Buddha. So we exist as Buddha, we have the mind of a Buddha. So they're not saying that we are Buddhas, but rather that we have the mind of a Buddha. And so they make this statement because, and here you should hopefully see a lot of similarity with what I've said, for all sentient beings, or for all beings, whether sentient or Buddhas, the natural emptiness of their mind, or natural nirvana, that and the let me restate this. So for sentient beings, the natural emptiness of their mind is natural nirvana, and that is the case for all sentient beings, and that there is no difference between that and the Dharmakaya of a Buddha. So this is the view that I've already asserted, and those who present that we already have the mind of a Buddha would say that too. And then they would take that a step further and say, and therefore sentient beings have the mind of a Buddha. Because their minds are naturally empty, and which is natural nirvana, therefore, and that is no different from the Dharmakaya, therefore sentient beings have the mind of a Buddha.
대시 건축이 예반하시 심게 라신 심 라신 유튜브 동바데 심전 탐지기를 여바 켈렘바 찍바래 심지기를 상여 요래서야 매 요마래라가 니가기 심게 라신이 심 라신 유튜브 동바데 심전 탐지기를 여바 찍바래 단 요래 이나야 심전 유기 심 라신 유튜브 동바데 심전 탐지기를 요래때 심전 유기 심 라신 유튜브 동바데 로버기 디마다 자요 말레스 로버기 디마 빵요 매바 쇠요 말레스 인자 상계라기 말레스 지난 코로나 요래때 코 라신이 냐 상계레스 라신이 냥데세 레데 이나고 냥데 말레스 제상고 상계 말레스 그러다 그래서 상계 많이 비김제 그래서 로버기 디마 빵요 말레스 로버기 디마 마빵바 인자 코 상계 말레스 다 지지리 심 라신 유튜브 동바디 심전 탐지 유튜브 여바 켈렘바 찍바 차르와 찍바래 로버기 디마당 마자와디야 켈렘바 찍바래 이나 찍딜 라신 야데 임바야 켈렘바 찍바래 이나야다 도스 돈다 디치바레데 이나 지디기 랑신기 냐데 요바인자 상게 요레세지 그 랑신냐데 요바이 김센데 상게 요레세 만주 상이 요 말에 라겐디 로버기 티마다 마자완자 상게 요 말에세지 제가 도스 돈다 삼다데 캬브로 요 말다 디니데 시글레스 담 람사 돈다 하모고나 삼다데 가다로 슈 통고르데 돈다 삼다나 캬브르 제메르다 디니
Between these two different views, there is so much that is similar. The foundation of the views is really identical. So both those who assert that we have the mind of a Buddha, we do not have a mind of the Buddha, will state that the empty, that the mind is naturally empty, and which is natural nirvana, and this is something all beings have. And also, both view holders would agree that for sentient beings, the mind, the empty nature of the mind is obscured by or veiled by adventitious afflictions, or afflictions which are adventitious or temporary, and therefore can be removed. Complete agreement. So where the difference comes is only now, at this point, where then some will say, because there is no difference between the nature of the mind of a ordinary being and the Buddha, or the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, it is suitable to say that the beings on the continuum of a being exists a Buddha, or exists as a Buddha. It's difficult to put this across, but the mind of, maybe you could say the mind of a being is that of a Buddha without the being a Buddha. So that is what one group says. The other would say, you can't yet say that. Whilst the nature of the mind is empty and is natural nirvana, no different from the Dharmakaya, because of the adventitious afflictions, it's inappropriate to label the person as existing as a Buddha. And the other side says, despite the adventitious afflictions, it is appropriate to label or to name the person as existing as a Buddha. So that's where the different presentation comes. The basis is of the view, the foundation of the view is identical, but the different assertion just comes at as whether the absence or lack of absence of the obscuring adventitious afflictions makes the being unsuitable to be labeled as existing as a Buddha, or still suitable to be labeled as existing as a Buddha because of the underlying natural nirvana. The being is suitable to be labeled as a Buddha. So that's where the difference in presentation lies, but there isn't a deep fundamental difference, although the views sound contradictory.
Beşero loya da denigi sunjero shu goba ina da donda la kar samazne sim ranshin youtube dongba de simjin gylo yoba inza simjin gyla sa yor sungores je yor sungya di sim ranshin youtube dongba de yores sungores je sa de sim ranshin youtube dongba de la ranshin gi nyang de ranshin gi nyomo ba le daware ranshin gi nyomo ba pang ba de sa ji de sa yores sungores sim ranshin youtube dongba de yoba yoba de la gonji yoba nzane san yore sonya de dire sa ji ko gore da simjin gula san yo mare sa de de simjin gula sim ranshin juba tongba de yore de ina ranshin juba tongba de lobo gi dimada ma jawa ranshin gi dimada jawa re de ina lobo gi dimada ma jawa re enza ko di la san ye la gi mare ranshin gi nyanga le de ba re de ina san ye la gi mare jesan dine enza lobo gi dimada ma jawa enza san ye yo mare sa ji Telecom la gore saji 당저 디 니스도 하고 봐이나 안에 지금 마추 바로 지다 양 꿀디 마용하게 냥아 여러 꿀디 제가 가시를 아직 니스도 하 먹었네 다디 가서 상계 요 심증 상계 여러서 킬 말렘 바이나 아니 미지 라마저 상계 요 심증 상계 여러다 소베네 다디 디기데 노트시기 최시 신문도 선배 람사 견다야게 냥아신 보여와 제자디 니스도 하고나 디용 말에 And Dinashin, Tangana Simjangula, Sanya Yore says, 다 심지기라 사유 요 말에 세지기 숨바 다디 고 신기 민도 고 노르시기 심벨람사 견 다야게 냥아요로 그래서 디네기서 디 숭타디 냥아디 가르가리 하고 바이나 딩아 주야 꿀데 마키야다 안지게 어디니스데 어디르와 디르와스베게 딱 녀바녀기 캬버요로 딘상이디 주 세시로 제호야베디 김자로 데리다
I'm going to repeat this now because I think it's important that this is clear, because you will have received teachings or read books from other traditions where they do assert that on the continuum of all sentient beings exists as a Buddha. And whereas in our tradition, we do not say that the continuum of sentient beings exists as a Buddha. So this does sound contradictory. And what I want to help guard you against from doing is criticizing the view of others when that is not warranted. Or should someone else criticize this view, you can explain to them why the two views are so similar, and there's a different way of expressing really the same view. So again, those who assert that the continuum of all sentient beings exists as a Buddha, is that because the continuum is naturally empty, which is natural nirvana, in other words, it's naturally free of the afflictions, and is no different from the Dharmakaya, it is suitable to say that the continuum of beings exists as a Buddha. The seemingly contradictory view or contrary view, as presented in our system, which is that all sentient beings the continuum of all sentient beings does not exist as a Buddha, is very similar, because it also says that the continuum of the mind is naturally empty, and that this is the natural nirvana, because it's naturally free of the afflictions and is no different from the Dharmakaya. But because it is obscured by the adventitious afflictions, it is not suitable to refer to the natural nirvana of the mind of a being as being existing as a Buddha. So it's only that last statement, because those who assert that the continuum of sentient beings exists as a Buddha would agree that that continuum is obscured by afflictions which are adventitious. So up to this point, there's complete agreement. The only difference in presentation is whether it is suitable to assert that the continuum of a being exists as a Buddha or does not exist as a Buddha. That's the only disagreement, or difference in presentation rather.
Dine zadang juge dinma de karosong sore ne chisan tongbai khasa da diringile tongbai ni toba yina an denzin dige loshe yinba hago tugure rangdo kinge tugure an jide denzin de loshe yinba hago de tongbai ni toba denzin loshe yinba hago de lo denzin de meba cha joya da dinigi an denzin de me tobe lo de chama gyab de yore se songyo de chesa dang juge sem rashing youtube tongba di ani juge sangye ko ba thoya la an juge 가서 내수기 녀모 바디 로버기 디마디 빵고거래 로버기 디마디 매바 쇠바이나 다장마 쇠바이나 나저기 샘 라싱이 주베 동바디야 모원 추구 뭐 주투고래스 제가 로버기 디마디 파 로버기 디마세데 덴제다 녀모 바디 차상 로버기 세디 유단 찐지래 데네 코지리 바마도 코 강라에 마도와 랑원네 지리 녀모 바지 매바로 봐 제가 로버기 디마세요 로버 유단 찐지 소원도 될라지네 그도 기용 그래 유단 찐디 매서나 녀모디 매바래 제가 로버기 디마 제가 디 매바 쇠발라 하는 아주기 동반이세 또 그래 동반이 또 봐이나 유기니스 나와나시 민도 선비게 동바 또 봐이나 나와나시 요래 선비 딘진데 리기 말에 지산디 딘진면나 될라디베 나와나시 요래 선비 로디 유딜레 차고에 차과에 리기 말 유딜레 미비 셰다 길리기 바래 나잘리기 말 저 요모 망고 쉬우지 밤에 봐자로 그래 진짜 니네 인자 도시네 가지고 위니서다 동반이 또 그래서 돼 김세로시 진짜 동반이 또 봐야네 din마네 고 냠용 딘딘딘딘 용그래 해야지 도시네 세부하고 투그래 해야지 언도 송도 된다 디르도 와다 body.
What we've looked at thus far this weekend is that as one continues to strive to receive teachings and make effort in one's meditations, the time will come when emptiness is realized, and eventually even with a valid cognition. And at that point, as we saw with the first bullet point, when one has gained a genuine experience of emptiness, then one will know without any uncertainty that all phenomena appear as being truly existent. And then when a phenomenon is focused on, it is then grasped at by another consciousness as existing in the way that it appears. And then thirdly, that from this, all our other afflictions come, believing that something truly is a source of happiness or truly is a source of suffering. We then either pull it towards us or push it away. The yogin who has gained a genuine realization of emptiness will see this vividly based on their own experience. And moreover, they will also, as we saw this morning in the fourth bullet point, they will recognize that the consciousness that grasps that phenomena as existing in a way that they do not is not in accordance with reality. It is a wrong consciousness because it is not supported by a valid cognizer, because it's grasping at a determined object or an engaged object, or it's engaging with its object in a way that it does not exist, truly. So therefore, it is a wrong consciousness, or we have here an erroneous mind, the two are synonyms, and it is not supported by a valid cognizer. And furthermore, the yogin will realize but their wisdom that they have once again generated is supported by a valid cognizer, because it is in accordance with reality. And thereafter, we spoke about our Buddha potential, that our mind is naturally empty. And because it's naturally empty, because it's naturally empty, that's the first point. And then secondly, that the afflictions are not the nature of the mind. They are not the essence of the mind, but they rather obscure or veil the mind. Second point. And then thirdly, with this, that those afflictions, despite appearing to mind as being truly existent, when you investigate, they are not independent but dependent. They are dependent arisings, and because they are dependent arisings, they can be eliminated. Therefore, they are adventitious, they are temporary. So here, we come to recognize that the nature of our mind is naturally empty, which means the afflictions are not the nature of the mind. They obscure the mind. And then thirdly, they are adventitious because they are dependent arisings. They can be eradicated completely. So this then, we come to now intellectually understand, but through continuing to apply ourselves, we will gain, like the yogin referred to here, experience that is unmistaken.
Mitabe do sine mitaba ko some time do kichi kichi go to go mitabe ko some time do and do share some time chik na ju gi diring se de kasang gi chik na ju samno nala garo sene nga kasane longa mane de yore se bi nga di yeman pa gymu tuje dara yede ba samno de da mo ba na muti ne degire se be samno ni di 다신 차로 제자는 가지고 가상 삼단에 지지지지지바 보고 로직 세데 세엔 지기 뒤지는 매바라 삼단에 되네기 제바 삼단에도 나 냐만에도 요래 선비 무티는 요래 선비 짐바디 도로 거다 하지 되네 오다디데 다다рем도 하선비 딩하 세데 다디 되네지마 뒤수지마도 민도 하선비 삼례 용으로 제자 되네기 삼노 미다바 삼례에도 당아줄에 가리 용거에서네 미디 알이야 녀만 알이야 쉬쉬니서 로녀만 알이야 지금 알이 쉬고 지금 통정 다상 알이 견제 지상 선배게 삼로 토네 알지야 코널 미디래 코널라 지어와 또 대서 삼다 대지 미다 봐 삼다도 야다 나세디 나마 요 말했어 제자다 롱아마 유교딩이 윤아마를 마다 나랑 문에데 말했어. 제가 나된 마치 칠칠치는다. 나 윤치마도 잘마도 예마데 나 말했어. 제자다 나마 미디기 나리아 디갑선 균주지 미디야 꼭게지게지 지스네 포 다데 안중님 통도게디 디기기지 치마마다 나마게 미디 말했다. 마연자다 나마게 미디기 나리아 균주지네 다데 미디리아 공가 콘랑고 스케미도아 선비게 다 콘로 랑고 미도아 선비 시에게 삼는 거로 다야지 나미게 균리에 지자 나미게 디기 나리아고 가서 균주 제바자 그 윤치마자가 콘랑 초그레 삼바 연습에네 디네 개왕아마 고영하나서 판도 시부지여서 아마 파마를 제 제가 판도 제 지자 개왕아마디야 개왕아마 디기도 그 윤치마를 와 지당 유인 미김천에 지내 콜 콘라고에네 개왕아마디 가서 판도 제바서 디 유인 미김천에 콜에 야보섬 당고도 왔으면 누섬 답에는 나중에 예마디와 가르 중요메 신기가 집에 지내 안도 권진디 마야야게 아니 캬바려 권진랑 안 예마 권을 뒤에서 안에디 바직 뒤에서 섬다 저러와데 권진 마야야다 아니 견제 마야데 캬바디 리투고래 저러와다
Also last night I spoke about impermanence, and this is an indispensable foundation to come to realize emptiness. So I encourage you to reflect deeply on impermanence. So the meaning, and here it's good to understand the meaning of impermanence and permanence. Impermanence means momentary change. That's subtle impermanence. Permanence means unchanging. It doesn't mean eternal. It means unchanging. Here in relation to the self, when we think about impermanence, the mistake that we make is that we think of ourselves throughout this continuity of our life, from when we were born to young to less young to middle age to our age now, and we relate to this self from past to present as being ourselves, unchanged, some essence that has not changed. Likewise, when you think about our future plans and aspirations, we're relating to the self of the future, going from the present to the future, not in the way of a continuity, but actually, well, continuum rather, but a continuity that has an element of permanence, an element that is permanent or unchanging. So this we need to reflect on, that there is a continuity of mind, but there is no permanent self to be found within that. This needs to be looked at well, no unchanging self to be looked at. And where we can come to recognize that our understanding of this is merely intellectual is if we think of someone that we've had conflict with in the past. And let's say we don't see them so often, but we know we have to meet them, perhaps at a meeting at work or socially, we have to meet them. What happens in our mind? Some apprehension arises. Perhaps we even talk to our partner or someone else about, oh, I'm not looking forward to meeting this person because of what they did. So what we are doing here is we are grasping at that person as being permanent, as being unchanging, as well as that event as existing by way of its own essence. And in this way, we believe that person is like this. This is their personality, fixed, unchanging, permanent. They did this, or they said that. And this event too, we grasp at as if it is permanent, unchanging, existing by way of its own essence. So this, and we do this, and this is a clear sign that we haven't reflected well enough yet on impermanence. Because if we have, it aids our understanding of dependent arising, so recognizing that this person has changed so much between perhaps last year and now. Why? Continuous influx of new causes being accumulated and new experiences, etc., and therefore the person continuously changes. If we have realized this, each time we meet someone, we recognize the potential for them to be new, to be different, for this to be a fresh encounter, free of past events which are long gone. Recognizing the potential for change within all, including ourselves. And if we think of the impact that the Dharma has, the change that can come from hearing a class is there, from the seeds accumulated. So ever more so with someone we haven't met for an extensive period of time. Then joining to this reflection, add that our relationship with this person may well have changed several times in this life, and certainly if we go back over preceding lives, our relationships certainly will have changed. Perhaps in the life immediately preceding this, or certainly a life previous to that, we knew them. They could have been a close friend. They could have been our mother. They would have helped us and cared for us. In other words, had a relationship completely different to now. This is the case, but we are not aware of that because we grasp at permanence. They are like this. They are like this. And occasionally, they show themselves as being different, and we're surprised. But we still tend, in the back of our mind, to hold on to how we perceived them previously, thinking that perhaps that is their true nature. So here we see how we're grasping at permanence, we're grasping at them as existing by way of their own essence. And this leads to the rise of resentment, of anger. We are grasping at an appearance that does not exist in the way that it appears, just like an illusion. But we, like in the illustration last night, are like the young child at the magic show, believing that what appears to our mind is true. This we need to let go of. So thank you. Then we can conclude here for the morning. If you have some questions, then please feel free to ask. Cameron.
Why is the term non-abiding for the emptiness of the nature of the mind? Why do we use the term non-abiding for the empty nature of the mind of the Buddha?
So the term non-abiding goes with non-abiding nirvana. Is that the term you mean?
Non-abiding nirvana.
Yeah. So why do we use the term non-abiding nirvana for the empty nature of the mind of a Buddha?
Why specifically non-abiding in the part non-abiding nirvana?
Minyape nyamde.
Minyape se nyomo bigi nyomo basha da jeba ne tele pa minyape se ro tele jolwa ro. Minyape. Neba la ne de ye tele ba shro. O de saji de ko ne yo mare se minyape re ko tele yo mare le go ba. Se da nyomo basha da jeba tele pa jolwa en sa minyape re tele minyape. Da nga zo nyomo basha jebe saji de ne de ro ba. Ma ne de za ma ba ba za ne minyape ma nga zo ne ba che ko. Se minyape la ne nyomo basha da jeba tele ma de ba pa tele jolwa en sa minyape.
It's nirvana, which it's a non-abiding nirvana. Nirvana then means sorrow has been transcended, the afflictions have been transcended. Nirvana. Non-abiding, what isn't abiding? The afflictions together with their seeds and imprints. That's what is not abiding. So just to say, this word abiding really means that, abide or abode or dwell. It's also used in the term phenomena do not abide in the way they appear. Or, in this instance, you'd say phenomena do not exist in the way they appear. So their abide can mean exist. Okay? But the word really is to abide or to dwell, but it can mean to exist. Phenomena do not exist in the way they appear. Phenomena, the final way of abiding, the final way of existing. So one wouldn't say non-existing nirvana, but one could say nirvana where the afflictions, the seeds and imprints do not exist. So in this way you can say non-existing nirvana, but it would sound a little strange. But what it refers to, non-abiding, non-existing, the afflictions, they don't abide, they don't exist, together the seeds and imprints. Okay?
Nyomo be nearly draw us. Nyomo be nearly draw a sick page in the Benanga, yes, and the dress of Sagidirwa, Sagidil powder, near daily powder dress or draw said Yorwada. She's a nearly draw us, Nyomo by the tea, and the Saginanche, deep bung draw a bung by the Nyomo be nearly draw us. She's at the Nyomo Basha, the Jebadi called near Saginanche. Della Mineba, Della Madio by Joshua in the Bangba in the Minebe Yang, the Nyomo, Basha, the Jeba, Della Della Madio by Padro Bonsar in the Minebe Yang, is a 60 disorder. That do not do it.
So, again, let's just radically retranslate non-abiding nirvana, which maybe makes it clearer. No longer abiding in sorrow. No longer abiding. Minepa, there's non-abiding. Is not abiding, and then in sorrow, this is having transcended sorrow, no longer abiding in sorrow, non-abiding nirvana.
I just wanted to clarify something. I wasn't sure if I heard it or understood it correctly. You're talking about the Dharma jewel, that someone has realized emptiness, and then they have attained true cessation, although they have not eradicated afflictions and seeds, and that's called Dharma jewel. And then later, after they also eradicate the afflictions and seeds, then it's called liberation or nirvana. But then I also heard that that's also called true cessation.
Yes.
So I was a bit confused.
Yes.
Which one is actually the true cessation? Is it the one earlier one or the later one?
So when is the actual true cessation? Is it when emptiness is first realized and the Dharma jewel is generated and the acquired afflictions are abandoned? Or is it later when liberation is attained and the afflictions together with their seeds are abandoned? Because it was said that both of those are true cessations.
Chesang Gokten, Nyomomba de la Nyomomba Pangba de la Gokten level, Gok, Senecas, Nyomomba Pa, Gok. Then said the Dini Pangba de Yedi by the Pangba Temba de la Gokten level. Chesang Nyomomba Pangba de la Gokten level. Penayan and Azuki, Sanji Nyomomba Pepe Pangba, Tian Gokten, Judgment Nyomomba Pangba Tian Gokten. The Nyomomba de la Kunda, the Lange, the Nyomomba Rimba Mangpa, the Gokten, Yachi, Mangurik Mangu, Nyomomba Kunda Pamba, Lange, Nyomomba la Kor Kuchen, and Chiki Gori in the Pampe, Gokten, what is a Gokten Middle, Dondala, Gokten, Rangi, Mogali, Timba Pampe, Pampas, Moga, Korongi, Pang Paegi, Pang Tuyegi, Mogali Tima, Pangpi, Pangba, Della, Gokten, that Gokten della Mangu. Dondala, Korongi, Nyomomba Kunda Pampi, Pambatian Gokten, Nyomomba Lange Pampe, Pambatian Gokten. Cisa Sanyi, Mini Benyade and Gokten, Gabriel Mini Benya, Gabriel, Gokten, Wada, Chida means no Gokten, Penetarapit, Pene, Nyomomba Sabanda Chibe Pampa, Nyomomba Sana Chibe Pampa, Nyomomba Kunda Pampe Pampa, Nyomomba Lange, Pampe Pamba, and Chasan Gokten, mean Chida Gokten, so said, Gok said, Ring Moholi Timba de Pa, Gok said, Dan said, the Pangje Pang by Koyede by instead, Dan said, Gokten said, Minglu did it. Gokten to good a Pangje, Nyomomba Gorgu, Nyomomba Gorgu, Pampi Gokten to go.
Just first to say, everything you repeated is what I think I said, and I clearly did, so good. So that is correct. So it comes down to this. What does the word cessation refer to? It refers to the cessation of the afflictions. And there are many levels to the cessation of the afflictions. So we normally refer to the cessation of the afflictions together with the seeds, and the afflictions together with their imprints or stains. So if we refer to that, it sounds like three levels. So there'll be a true cessation at the attainment of the path of seeing, when one realizes emptiness directly, as well as when one attains liberation, which is the eighth bodhisattva ground, or is when the Hinayana arhats become, or the Hinayana hearers and solitary realizers become arhats. So that's also a true cessation, because there now the afflictions and their seeds have been completely abandoned or ceased. And then when the stains of the afflictions are abandoned by this bodhisattva, and in the moment the bodhisattva arises as the Buddha, rises with the Dharmakaya, the nature truth body, the naturally abiding nirvana, and a true cessation. In fact, there are many true cessations. Every ground of the bodhisattva is attained with a true cessation. So then your answer in brief is there are many true cessations, and the cessation refers to differing due to the abandonment of the afflictions, and there are many levels of abandonment, hence many cessations.
With the fourth point on page 22, with the consciousness which perceives selflessness, does that necessarily or not refer to direct perception?
Direct perception of emptiness?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the fourth point, where it says consciousness which perceives selflessness, does or does this not refer to a direct realization of emptiness? Yeah? Okay.
니가요 동 어성이 또 별로요 동이 던지수기 또 별로 동이 또 별로라네 지산 받지 디 나로를 예와치나 동반이 모습도 별로야 용거래 동반이 던지수기도 별로 니가 용거래 니가 제 말아와.
So where it says a consciousness which perceives selflessness, and then it goes on to, the sentence ends with it being supported by a valid cognizer. So this means that the consciousness which perceives selflessness is a valid cognizer, and it can be either type of valid cognizer. So direct or inferential. So in other words, where emptiness or selflessness is realized directly without the, or not by means of a meaning generality, or it's an inferential realization, which is a valid cognizer, which realizes emptiness or selflessness by means of a meaning generality. So it refers to either of those. But it is a valid cognizer, so either direct or inferential.
And so with a direct experience, could it be that a flash? Or, because often we hear about bodhisattva or whatever meditating going into emptiness, but like what qualifies the point where you have that direct experience? Does it have to be in like an extended period of time?
And just to be clear, by a flash, do you mean that it comes and then it's gone? One no longer has realized emptiness, it's now something still to be done? Or it has suddenly come about, but now it has been done?
No, I mean like if you just have a flash of experiencing it that someone might have.
Okay.
원숨도 세르베 원숨도 동반 영어숨도 또 세디다 미니 원숨 마도니엘네 냠바샤 규니고 냠샤제 딩안에다 동반 영어숨 또 주고라 단 남상 까마지 메와 말이다 동반 영어숨도 별로디 어스 니고래 다 아니 데네 찌네 코나 주 그런 게 냠린데 또 규니가 공고선에 그런 규니가 공여와 네 데네시 공네 난 샤나체 와선베디 그도 균통화로와 데네 이제 그 까마직파 검제파 예로와 되네 말에 그 소수기 냠차데 네와디 그런 주기 냠차 델레 지코로 딩 그래서 체로스 마선의 소 난주부 호롱기 냠랭이 재탕이 돈에 균링을 되어요. 가시 균링 묶으면 가시 한지 균 돼서 통하고 면 나서 용식이
The attainment of a direct realization of emptiness would have been preceded by extensive study and reflection and extensive meditative equipoises. So it wouldn't in that way happen suddenly. There would be extensive prior preparation. And in the meditation session where emptiness is realized, this would come about within a meditative session. So there would be in meditative equipoise, and the analysis would at that point get them to that final step, and then it would be realized. So then, in terms of how long they would abide in that initial realization of emptiness, this isn't fixed, but it would again be for maybe you could say a noticeable period of time. It wouldn't just be momentary. The yogin would abide in that. This is the first time they have realized emptiness directly. They will abide in that, familiarizing the mind with that. How long it is, this would vary depending on the yogin, but it would not be a mere flash. They would abide in it. Yeah.
Just in relation to the definition of the Dharmakaya, I thought you said that it was the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. So I'm just trying to work out, like, I thought Dharmakaya was the Buddha's mind, which is, the empty is the same as anything else. But you're suggesting that it's defined as the empty, Dharmakaya as the emptiness of Buddha's mind. Is that what you mean?
So is the Dharmakaya the emptiness of the Buddha's mind or just the Buddha's mind? Yeah? Okay.
추구세들의 니어를 니가 예시 추구다 원이고 세 니어와 대신 어서 세의 추구세도 원이고 계셔와 상계 이투데라 아니 예시 추구라고 그래 상계 묘모 뻥배 고된데라 원이고라고 니가 게다 군지들의 예시 가서 추구라비도 니가 나로 열에 상계 투디야 추구래 상계 묘모 뻥배 고된데야 추구래 니가 초대 추구래 다 최고세의 명지다 집의 명지 미세야 집발에 다 지나는 명 캬와체바는 원이고다 이시 추고세의 네가 캬와체의 명 소소라다바나 이시 추고 사이두들 이시 추고체 사이 유고된데라 원이고세의 명카하다고 그래 dinga domne mingjigba jigdadu 최고세 명제 배나서 미세야 미 지명로와 미라는 차산을 고용을 때 디미나네 야갈메스 레미치니 차사여로와 다야 개발체도 디 야갈미르디 오슬레미르세 개발체여로와 디나시 최고랍네 집에 지당을 민디세 다디 예와 코로나도 소소 개발체네 예와치 민 코로나 투모면 민다이도 예시 최고세야 투기레 예시 최고제 상유유 고된데라 모니고스 민다고로
모니고 상기기 고된 예시 최고제
상유유 투기레 예시 최고라고 그러지 예시라고도 켐바디라.
So just like we would say that all humans are people, we are all humans, but we could divide people up into, for example, those who are Australian, those who are Indian, and so forth. But we could use a general term, keep calling everyone people. So the term Dharmakaya or truth body is similarly a general term that has two divisions. So there are two divisions to the Dharmakaya, but both divisions can be referred to as the Dharmakaya. So the one is the true cessation or the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha, and that's the nature truth body. Then, so this is if one's dividing. Then one would say the mind of the Buddha would be the wisdom truth body. But you can, so that's how you divide it into two, the nature and the wisdom truth body. The nature truth body is the true cessation of the mind of the Buddha, or the emptiness, and the wisdom truth body, you could say, is the general mind of the Buddha. You could condense them and just talk about the truth body, or the Dharmakaya, and there it would refer to both the true cessation or emptiness of the mind of the Buddha, as well as the mind in general of the Buddha.
So when you were referring to Chuni, was that the nature truth body?
The Chuni is something different, but here, which is just the final reality of phenomena, including the Buddha's mind. But here, of the two Dharmakayas, it was referring to the nature truth body, the emptiness or the true cessation of the mind, not the wisdom truth body, but the nature truth body. So yes.
And with the term emptiness in relation to the mind, the Buddha's mind, you were saying there's the emptiness of afflictions in an enlightened mind. So you were using the term emptiness for those two different classifications?
What I think I would have said was that the enlightened mind is empty of the afflictions, as in an absence, but the afflictions themselves are empty. Are empty, but the enlightened mind is they're not in the nature of the mind, so they're empty. The enlightened mind is empty of them. They're just obscure.
Yeah, so you weren't using the term emptiness?
I don't think so.
Thank
I hope
you.
not. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we'll conclude there. If there's still some questions, then the next session. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.